Stay tuned. I sit down with Jasmine DiLucci, who's a tax accountant, CPA, and EA, and what she shares about the things agents do to get themselves in trouble with the IRS blew my mind. As always, I'm your referral partner out of San Francisco, Sean Conkler. Jasmine, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Of course, no problem.
It was kind of cool. I stumbled upon your Instagram feed, and
Oh yeah?
you were giving just such good advice. I feel like there's a lot of bad advice on social media,
Yeah.
and you were just giving really awesome tips and tricks about taxes. And I was like, oh, I totally want to pick your brain. I think it's so much needed for the agent community. It's one of the big areas we always get in trouble. So that's why you're here. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
If you could, I would love for the listeners to get up to speed really quick in a couple sentences. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. I'm Jasmine DiLucci. I am a tax attorney, CPA, and an enrolled agent. So I always say all three now because with social media, it's like everyone presents themselves as a tax expert. But I got my enrolled agent license back in high school. So
Wow.
I actually started really early. So that's why I think people will be like, oh, she still looks young. But I was just in a family of tax. So I started as soon as I possibly could, and then obviously went all the way through. And so today, I run a 20-person CPA firm. I
Amazing.
love my team. That's pretty much it. Like that's the main thing. And I started it back like after college is when I really got involved and then actually had to run it through law school. So I like all of the years I was in law school full time, I actually also was running my business full time. And then as soon as law school ended, I was like, okay, we got to grow this thing even more, which we did and we really grew. But then the social media thing I just started, I don't know, it was really only like at most 2 years ago where I
Okay.
was like, I need to just start talking more to people because I think like we didn't have any shortage of clients and everything was going well, but I
Yeah.
got the common like I don't know, I just felt like I was repeating all the same stuff 24/7. Like I'm just going to keep giving the same advice and then obviously social media started getting bigger to where people would come to me and be like, "Hey, I heard this or I heard that."
Yeah.
And so eventually I was like, I am just going to say what I think and what I know.
So this is really awesome. Like, obviously, I wanted to have you on to talk about the tax component because I think agents get themselves into a lot of trouble really quick. But I'm also super fascinated now that you were running
Yeah.
a team while in school, going
Yeah.
for like an incredibly hard degree.
Yeah.
Um,
It
that,
was hard. Yeah. I mean, everyone thought it was crazy,
yeah,
but
it sounds
that's
it.
always the sign that you're like doing something good is how I see it. Like I don't want to be viewed as like doing the normal thing, but yeah, I already had the firm. It's like what was I gonna do? Give it up? Shut it down? No way. So at that point we were only at about like 600,000 gross receipts. And so I had
Yeah.
like a little team of like five people.
Okay.
But it was my income and it paid my way through law school. So what was I going to do? Not do it?
That is
Um,
so amazing. I love
yeah,
that. Did you,
yeah,
now we're totally going down this rabbit hole. I love it. Were you always an entrepreneur?
yeah. But I think it didn't, I think it's like whatever's repeated to you when you're younger. I think a lot of times just it becomes you, because you're so young, you don't have that filtering. So my dad always loved business and cared a lot about business. So he
Mhm.
just like always said things that just assumed like I was going to do business. So I don't know if it was this natural thing, but it was just spoken to me so early that it became very natural. And I think, you know, like our relationship with parents, right? My dad's always been a little bit controlling. So I think I learned to like resist authority very early in my life. And so I just like, I cannot deal with people telling me what to do, especially when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so I think I just was like, well, I just don't like being somewhere where people are telling me what to do. And I think a lot of times people do things that don't make any sense, especially at like larger businesses,
For
even
sure.
smaller businesses that aren't run well. It's like you, I want to fulfill my capability. And if I want to do more or do more interesting things, I don't want to be like limited by someone else. So I did work very briefly for Ernst and Young after college, just because it's like the thing you're supposed to do. So I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I'm gonna do the thing that I've been told that I'm supposed to do, and then you go there, and I saw like my own motivation just like disappear,
Uh,
because I've always been I've just been very academic. Like I love working, I love learning, I love studying. And then I worked there and I don't know, I was like, I'm not the top performer here and I don't have a desire to be the top performer here. And I think it just came from, it's like I wasn't building anything.
Say no more. You're preaching to the choir. Yeah, it's like I can climb this ladder, but I'm just going to be a rung at the top,
Yeah.
or I
Yeah.
can go build my own ladder. And
Or
all of
it's more
the
like a little wheel, like a little hamster wheel. I can
yeah,
keep running in the hamster wheel and like not really go anywhere.
yeah. You look around, you're like, I'm kind of in the same spot. I'm just
Yeah.
running faster.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So, is it your dad who owned? I'm assuming owned
Mhm.
the CPA firm.
It was both my parents. So
Okay.
my mom was a CPA and then she's since passed, but my dad is an enrolled agent. And they, yeah, started it together. And it was just your classic accounting firm. Like they were good accountants,
Yeah.
but running the firm is like a separate skill set entirely, like marketing, getting the clients, setting up clients properly, billing, like the whole operation side was not great because it was very small. And so that's where I ended up just kind of honestly, I took it over by necessity. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I just really want to take over the family CPA firm. It was
Mm.
more, okay, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to do tax law. But then my mom got sick. And so I was like,
Uh,
well, oh, shoot. So that's where ended up just taking it over out of necessity. It was totally like I'm just going to pretend I know what I'm talking about. And then every time someone mentions something, I'm going to go look it up because I actually don't yet know what I'm talking about. And I kind of had to just learn like under the gun
yeah.
right then and there because my mom was supposed to teach me, but then it was just very quick where she wasn't able to have any time
Wow.
to teach me. Yeah.
Wow. And it sounds like you're the personality that just thrives under fire when it's like
Yeah.
when the stakes are high, you're like,
Mhm.
let's go. And I think
Yeah, it was
that's
kind of, it was exactly, it like helped me, as much as I had opportunities to learn from my mom earlier.
mm,
But I didn't because I didn't need to because she was doing the thing. And I was like, okay,
sure.
we're good. I'm just going to go to law school. So it was like, it forced me to learn at a really, really fast rate.
Interesting. Similar to you, my dad started his third and final company when I was about 5 years old. So, and my parents
Oh,
divorced. So on weekends, I would hang out with him, which ultimately meant I was hanging out at the shop while he was doing projects,
wow.
finishing up work. And I was just always around it. Like I was around, I saw the hard days. I saw when the money was coming in and things got good. I saw the different evolutions and the company grow. And I think for me, just being an observation of that throughout my whole
Yeah.
childhood, like all those really formative years, I uh I think it just ingrained in my DNA of like just build your own thing. You can do it. Like it was never a question if I could. And then I mean, my grandmother had a company, my grandfather owned a bar. Like my uncle had a design studio. Like
Yeah.
it was around me. And my dad also is a control freak, mind you. And
Yeah.
so it was like, I mean, we would butt heads because he'd be like, we're doing it this way. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to do it this way. And so it was
Right.
just like oil and
That's why I did
water.
a lot of that with my dad. Eventually he gave in. But yeah, I always wanted to do my own thing. I didn't know how that would land. I definitely wasn't thinking, oh, I really want to do my own CPA firm though, because
Yeah.
I saw honestly my parents struggle with it. It was like clients wouldn't pay, they would like get a bunch of free work, and then my mom would get yelled at for like sending an invoice. It's that kind of classic cycle when you don't set clear expectations with your clients.
Yeah.
You take in every client, like it's all the same, whatever business you're in. Like you have to just be clear the expectations. You have to take in people who are not going to yell at you or be rude. Like, and then if you're going to do good work, like the client doesn't know unless you explain and communicate it properly. So like all that stuff. So I didn't think it
100%.
was that lucrative to have a CPA firm. Um, I was thinking more just like in the law realm. And then of
Yeah.
course they end up like working so well together that it's really like I like today. I always say like I bridge the two together,
Yeah.
because most people just refer back and forth between their CPA and their attorney.
Yeah, it's true. I know from my side, like I always have questions and it's you get referred back and forth. And so if you have it literally in one house, it's way easier. And
Yeah.
to your point earlier too, which is not dissimilar from real estate, as you mentioned, like your parents had strengths in one category, but not with all these other categories. That's an agent right there in a nutshell. That's what I am. Like I am terrible at keeping good books. I'm terrible at understanding taxes. I'm like I know where I'm really terrible, but I also know from talking to my dad when I was getting into this business of who I should hire. He's like, hire a really good attorney, hire a really good bookkeeper, and figure out those areas that you're just not going to ever be good at, and hire really amazing people to fill those gaps for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of goes back to like resource allocation as a
Yeah.
business owner. I mean, the best thing is like whoever can figure out where to allocate their time and energy and money is the person that wins. It's not the person who's the best at everything. So whether it's a realtor or whatever business you're in, some of the most successful business owners are just the ones that can recognize where actually their time is a really big waste to spend it in that area. Uh, and so a lot of times, I mean, it's like with realtors, I mean, a lot of the, not just realtors, but like a lot of the professions where it's very communication heavy. So you need to be
Hmm.
great at people, speaking to people, kind of element of like sales, even marketing, right? Which I think a lot of times that's true for realtors, in my opinion, where
Sure.
it's a people business. So that is a lot of times their strength. I tend to see in any industry where that's the strength, a lot of times the weakness is those details behind the scenes, financials, because I think it's just two different totally different skill sets. And so the ones that are at least smart enough to like recognize that and be like, I need to at least know enough to qualify
Yeah.
someone and make sure I've got the right person on it and then know how to ask questions, even though I don't know the first thing about this stuff. That's the person that it tends to succeed. And then alternatively, I see people that are phenomenal at sales. Then of course, what does that do? That earns a ton of income.
Hmm.
But then if they didn't have like a little bit of planning insight to like get the right person in place on the financial side, it just ends in like catastrophe, right? With
Yeah.
taxes, levies, liens. Like I've seen the whole, every day I see that stuff, but especially with professions that are very 1099 heavy, like
And
realtors.
I see that with my colleagues and really close friends a lot, where they're super talented at selling. And so they get themselves in trouble or they're heading towards trouble. And they're like, oh, I'll just sell my way out of it. Like I'll just keep producing more income and I'll be fine. But then the economy shifts or interest rates radically change. And now they're not able to do that. And now everything starts crumbling down around them.
Yeah, even if the economy doesn't shift, I mean, it's an avalanche, right? If you're going to produce
Sure.
more income to pay tax, I mean, you can't produce $100,000 of income to pay off $100,000 of tax. You have to go produce another $200,000 of income, so it ends up being where it's an avalanche and you like can't catch up anymore. And then the interest that the IRS is accruing now with the interest rates being high, I mean, a lot of times you just never get out from under it. So I'll see
Yeah.
people, it's kind of similar like student debt. You see this, but also with the IRS where it's like, well, my original bill was 80,000. I've been paying them for 5 years and my bill is now still 80,000.
You're like, that's math. That's how it
Yeah.
works.
Like, that's called compounding interest.
Yeah, it's you're either paying compounding interest. I can't remember. Einstein had a great quote around it. It's either you're either like gaining from it or you're paying it,
Yeah.
but that's it.
Yeah, you want to be on the better side of it. Because I mean, it gets
Exactly.
real. I think for so many years, we obviously had low interest rates. So everyone got used to like, I'm just not going to pay my estimate payments because honestly, you could make more doing almost anything else other
Yeah.
than paying in your estimates because the IRS interest rate was so low. But now it's obviously not. And then in addition to whatever that interest rate is, it's for the IRS, it's compounded daily. So then it's not really
Jesus.
like, you know what I mean? You see like it's just whatever 8% or whatever, and then it's like, well, compounded daily, so it's not really just 8%. So it ends up really truly being something that people end up they make one mistake, and then it's like now I'm paying for it, thinking about it for the next 8 years.
What's speaking of mistakes with let's say entrepreneurs, what's the kind of the biggest area where they steer themselves into trouble?
The biggest area, I mean, there's so many different mistakes I've seen. Um,
All right, let's do top three or five, however long you think that list should be.
but I mean, okay. There's you could do an infinite number of things when you're a business owner, but okay, so most common is obviously just like literally not setting aside enough for tax.
Okay.
Like we
Just
say, we call
budgeting.
that, let's go super basic. But, when you're earning on a 1099, everyone seems to forget about self-employment tax, right? Because it all hits at the end of the year. So things like saying, oh, well, I'm in the 20% tax bracket. Well, okay, yeah, 20% for income tax plus 15% for self-employment tax. You're now at 35%, and you're not making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're making much less. So that's one. And then the other is IRS transcripts. So nobody checks them for whatever reason. They are by far the best thing. I mean, to me, that's like the easiest fix you could make.
Hmm.
It's quite literally saying, well, the IRS has information on me. Do I want to look at it in advance of filing my return? The answer should always be yes. It's like there's literally no reason to not see information that you know with 100% certainty that the IRS has. And so you can go literally to the IRS website, get transcripts, just like Google it, and it'll pull up the IRS website where you create an account and you can pull your transcripts. And this is the thing that I probably repeat the most just because it's by not doing that, that's what creates the majority of the issues that I see. So like IRS notices, the IRS is totally understaffed. So as far as getting audited, it's so much less likely than something like an automated notice because it's auditable because at least brokerages could not 1099 and a business entity. They had to 1099 the individual.
Hmm.
But then, of course, that realtor wants to get fancy and they talk to an unknowledgeable tax preparer and they go create an S Corp. So then, meanwhile, they're reporting all their income on the S Corp. But the personal transcripts and the personal social security number is what was 1099. So then the type of issue I would see like literally every day was a realtor coming in and other industries too,
Hmm.
where they say, well, I reported all the income on my business, but the IRS added that income onto my personal return as well. And I have an IRS notice here, and it's obviously going to give me a heart attack. It says I owe $50,000, and it's because of that mismatch from the transcripts.
Interesting. In so are you recommending, just so I understand it, because I've never heard this before either, with the IRS transcripts, individual people, like you're recommending that I do it, or do you recommend, or does your like CPA or tax person do that for you?
So I mean, it's more rare for a preparer to do it. So I mean, obviously it's great if they do it for you, but I don't think it's something you can rely on. I think
Okay.
it's better if you do it yourself. And then you could always, I think the easiest way that's guaranteed is like you pull them yourself. You can give them to your tax preparer. Um, and then I always, I'm personally like I love double checking. So to me, it's like a lot of tax preparers still don't know what to do with it. The thing is, you have to know the ins and outs just a little bit. So the biggest thing is that transcripts don't fully populate until May or June of
Okay.
the year. And then even then, they're still going to be missing things like a K-1 that could be issued to you later in the year, right? But even for like your basic information, it's not going to populate until later because the IRS systems are slow and there's no other logical reason for it. They're just not up to date. Um, and so that's one thing to know because if you check your transcripts in March, then you'll be like, oh, we're in the clear. There's nothing on here. Meanwhile, everything's going to pop up later. And the biggest problem with these IRS notices that generate is that they generate, again, IRS systems are slow.
Mhm.
So they notify you of the income you left off 2 years later.
Oh,
So
geez.
you're like, well, I would have paid the tax had I known, but now it's 2 years later and and they'll automatically assess either a understatement, like a substantial understatement penalty, which is very high. It's a higher penalty. Or if you don't qualify for that one, then it's a negligence penalty. So they'll automatically assess it. And now you have this uphill battle to climb where you're basically like fighting it. And it's like there's a lose-lose because like maybe you can get rid of it, but you're probably going to pay someone to help you get rid of it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a lose lose if you get
Yeah.
into that tussle. Like you're not coming
Right.
out not bloody, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's going to be some loss of like energy, time, money. So that's as far as like, I mean, for my clients, we do check transcripts pretty much for everyone, but the client has to get us either a power of attorney or called a Form 8821. So
Okay.
one of those two to be able to do it. But even then, some clients will rush you to file early in the year. Well, then, I mean, your transcripts aren't ready.
And
Uh, Yeah.
And with regards to the transcripts, is this so I have an LLC and then I have my own personal? Is it would I pull two or is it am I just pulling one?
You can, but the transcripts that are most helpful are for the personal. So
Okay.
you would pull, I would say, you and a spouse if you have one. Ideally, you just pull it for both people. So you've got three types of transcripts that I'd look out for. You'll have your wage and income transcript. That one's going to have the most important information. So it's the 1099s that have been filed, the W-2s. A lot of times people forget they withdrew from a retirement account. I mean, crazy things I've seen, just like people have 1099 cancellation of debt forms that have been issued to the IRS but were never sent to them. So you think about honestly a common situation where like maybe some credit card from 8 years ago that realized you never paid them, and instead of going after you, they're like, oh, we'll just issue them the 1099-C, and oops, we issued it 8 years later. So I've seen that where it's just it pops up on there because everyone tells me, they'll say, Jasmine, like I have all my tax documents, okay? And then it's like you pull the thing and oh yeah, well I sold my home, but that's not taxable, right? And it's like, well, the
Jeez.
IRS has that you received 500,000 in gross proceeds. They are going to assume it's taxable unless we do what? Put it on the dang return. So it's like all those things that, and that's another example, right? People will, oh, I'm just not going to put the house on the return because it's not taxable. I heard on TikTok that
Oh
I lived
God.
in it 2 out of the last 5 years, so we're good to go. Well, okay, that's the TikTok version, and it's not incorrect to say it's not taxable, but then where do we need to put on the tax return? Well, we need to put it on Schedule D,
Yeah.
the Section F. We need to disclose it. We need to show that it's excluded for the personal gain exclusion and non-taxable. Otherwise, what will the IRS do? They will add on the gross proceeds, assume a $0 of basis, and let you tell them otherwise in responding to the IRS notice.
I'm telling you, it's a slippery slope. And it's one of those things, it's like, if I could say nothing else to agents or entrepreneurs, like hire just really good people right out of the
Mhm.
gate, like even when before you have the money, because they're
Yeah.
going to help set you up for success in the future without having all of these crazy problems. I wrote myself a note. I'm pulling transcripts. In all these years, I've never heard of this. So
Yeah.
like this conversation was worth its weight in gold. I appreciate that.
Of course. Yeah, I want everyone to know. So I covered wage and income transcript. Account transcript is going to tell you things like, was your extension actually filed and received?
Hmm.
Any estimate payments you're making, like did the IRS lose my money or did it actually show up on my account?
Oh,
Which we've seen
serious?
that. Yeah, it's like you make a payment and then maybe you make a check payment, but you don't give enough identifying information. Sometimes they just like won't credit it to your account. So it's like you can go double check that stuff, the account transcript, and then there's also the tax return transcript. So you can check to make sure, obviously, that your return was filed and then what was actually on the return. And does it even match the copy that was given to you by your preparer, right? Because that's also possible where, I mean, we're all human, right? So some preparers, change the return, or maybe they have some associate that just doesn't do a good job, updates your return, files it wrong. It may not be, the filed version may not be what you got. And so you can check all of that yourself, which you should
That's
do.
that's wild.
Yeah.
That's yeah, I had no idea this whole layer even existed.
Yeah.
It's crazy, terrifying
Hmm.
actually. That it's attached to us and most people don't even know this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super useful information. And so I know a lot of people want to be hands off. I get it, but it's like, again, like going back to being a business owner, would I love to be a business owner and be hands off in all these different areas of the business? Yeah, but it's like you need to know enough to know that it's being handled. And so a lot of these
Yeah.
things, you just have to learn a little bit to then that also tells you, like if you understand your transcripts, then when you ask certain questions to your preparer, you can tell if that person has no clue what you're talking about, like maybe they're not qualified to take over the whole thing.
This is a God's honest truth. A friend of mine asked me about, he was like, hey, question, like who are you using for an accountant? And I was like, why? I thought you had somebody. And he's like, yeah, he's got a new job. And I asked him about RSUs. And the accountant said, what are RSUs?
What's an
And I was
RSU?
like, you got to find somebody else, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and so that was his like trigger. So I agree. I mean, I think you got to know the questions to ask and that are pertaining to you because I think, and you can probably correct me on this, but I just feel like it's different. It's a different layer when you're 1099, and there's just so many different layers to it, and knowing the nuances of what applies, like what laws you can apply to certain things and what you can and can't write off, which I think is another topic you should probably touch on because I think nobody really understands that. I think
Yeah.
the episode of Schitt's Creek when David was talking about write-offs is
Yeah.
probably the most real. And
I don't
also,
know. I don't watch that show.
oh my God, I'll send you the clip. It's hilarious. He's like, oh, we'll
Yeah.
just write it off. And then his father's
Yeah.
like, do you know what a write-off is? And he's like, I
Yeah.
don't know. You just write it off. And like they're going back and forth. And David thought if you write it off, it's just magically free.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's,
I know a lot of people, I mean, I've actually had that from clients. I remember it's rare because most clients that I take in like get it to some extent, but I do remember one client questioned, like they bought a Mercedes because who doesn't nowadays? And he bought a Mercedes and obviously it's a deduction, so they still owe tax. And he was questioning why he still owed tax. And I'm like, well, I mean, you get the deduction, right? So you reduce your income, but you don't reduce your tax by the amount you spent, right? It's not a credit. And he's like, oh, well, you didn't tell me that. Like, I don't even know what we're discussing right now. Like, it's like, if you could spend money and it bring your tax down dollar for dollar, none of us would pay tax because we would all just go spend our money,
it's
right?
true. Yeah, you would just,
Like, why would I, if I could spend $5, I'm spending $5 either way, paying the IRS or paying God knows what. I would rather just do absolutely anything else. So if it was always dollar for dollar, like literally no people would pay tax. So yeah, no, it's like tax is hard. I don't know. I mean, I think some of these things are easier. Obviously, it's my day to day though, but
yeah.
like still tax as a whole is very hard. Like it gets really, 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 really complex to where I literally learn every day. I mean, I quite literally set aside time to study because there's an infinite number of things for me to still learn. And so it is kind of frustrating, and that's where part of I went online, ended up going all in on the social media stuff, but it's like
Yeah.
frustrating because I think the people who post the most online are the least qualified in general. Not always, but like a lot of times they just have time on their hands, right? Like your
It's
classic
true.
accountant is busy and the last thing they want to do is spend extra evening or weekend time posting. They're like, I just want to relax. And so those are some of the most qualified people are like grinding it out at a desk, working constantly, like, please don't bring me any new clients. I'm so tired. Um, and so the people I think that tend to have the most time don't have clients. But
Yeah.
what does that mean? They don't have experience. And so they tend to I was just doing a video on this the other day, but in my opinion, it's like that we've all like been in school, right? And like the A student leaves the exam being like, "Oh my gosh, like I think I missed this thing and I think I missed this thing," because they're so smart that they're like so hyper aware of the things they don't know.
Yeah.
And then like that lower end student comes out and is like, I don't know what everyone's talking about. That was like really wasn't that bad. Like I think I did well. And it's like it's because they can't even see, they have no awareness of the things that they don't know that
Yeah.
they actually think they're correct. And I think it's the same thing for tax gurus. Like, it's not that they're being malicious or they're like, I'm going to post all this terrible, wrong stuff. I think the majority of people actually think they're correct.
Yeah.
Like, they're in their heart of hearts. They're like, I am so on the money. I'm correct. I'm amazing. I'm so sophisticated. I'm smart. But it's because they've done so little research and have so little experience that they don't know that what they don't know.
I mean, I think that's true with every industry. Is in the first few years, you know enough to be dangerous, and you don't know what you don't know. You don't understand, like you understand the high level, the big brushstrokes, but it's a lot of it's like legal talk, right? It's like if this, then that, and that's
Yeah.
where everybody gets super confused. And I feel like tax is like that. It's like, well,
Mhm.
yeah, you can do that if you're doing this, and if you're doing this, then you can't do this and that, and you're like, oh. And that's where I check out. I'm like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
lost. Like this maze makes zero sense. I'm gonna talk to a professional of like, okay. And it's funny on that same vein. I think a lot of agents make this mistake. They get to the end of the year and they're like, okay, what can I write off? Rather
Yeah.
than having a strategy throughout the
Yeah.
year of
Hmm.
like how are we going to spend and be strategic and kind of do things more systematically.
Yeah.
Um,
And
uh,
honestly, one of the best strategies with the IRS, I mean, again, it's not the sexy stuff, it's not the TikTok stuff, viral stuff, but I mean, saving your receipt, like, sounds so stupid, but it's like if you're gonna choose between having a really legitimate expense but losing the receipt versus like having a little bit of a questionable expense but like keeping the receipt, you'd actually be in a better spot just with the more questionable expense but keeping the receipt. I mean, that's kind of just how the IRS operates. Like they're so used to showing up and having absolutely no proof of anything
yeah.
that but then people try to combine those things. They want to do some fun, interesting stuff and not keep any support. And that's where it's like, okay, like, you're really not in a good spot.
Like thankfully my bookkeeper early on she was like, just write notes on your receipts. And we don't get that many receipts in a day. Like the reality, it's either going to be an electronic receipt, which is easy. I just forward it. And then if it's a paper receipt, I mean, how many am I actually getting in a day or a week? It's not that many. And so I just at night will I'll usually dump them actually in the morning on my desk and then just write. It was like, oh, this was for a marketing event. This was for blah blah blah. This was for the office, and I literally write a note on it, and then throw it in an envelope, and then once a month I shoot them off to my bookkeeper, and it's way easier, especially at the end of the year, because there's only like 10 things that aren't accounted for rather than pages and pages. It's usually the Amazon.
Yeah.
It's the Amazon checklist of uncategorized, which I have in my inbox right now, and there's like 100 things, and I'm not looking forward to it because
Oh
I have to
no.
like literally go through each one and be like, okay, this was an expense for this property. Um, but I do feel, and you could probably speak way better than I can of this, but I feel to your point, keeping the records and keeping some sort of tracking is going to be, at least in the eyes of the IRS, it looks like you're actually trying versus just kind of like shrug and be like, I don't know, I don't have it.
Yeah.
Let's talk cars. Because I feel like this one is all over social media. There's so much craziness that people say
Mhm.
of, oh, like you can get a loan and then buy $100,000 car, and as long as it weighs over 6,000, you can bypass the taxes. And I just feel like there's so much garbage to all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I know it's very nuanced and it depends on how things are structured in the individual, but can you kind of unpack some of that for us?
Yeah. I mean, like cars are actually, even though we see it as like the separate category, I mean, it's kind of similar to how we view a lot of the things we do for business, right? I mean, it all comes back to business use and business purpose, like the actual substance. And so, um, if you're using your car for business, there's probably a deduction there. But of course, what people are trying to do a lot of times is like they want to have just one car. And I'll see them say, well, that's my only car. That's the only way I have to get around. And I only work. I don't do anything personal. I've never done anything personal a day in my life. It's 100% business. So, and then therefore, I see a lot of people be like, okay, I'm not going to track anything because it's 100% business. But of course, everything is always like guilty until proven innocent with the IRS, right? So I think a lot of people's mentality is, how can the IRS show that it's not for business? And it's like, well, the IRS doesn't have to do that. Um, you just have to show that it is for business. So keeping a mileage log, classifying all of the miles, and then at that point, as far as like writing it off, I mean, you can, right? But what people do is they write off whether it's all of it or part of it. Obviously, if you sell it, you're going to lose that tax benefit, right? So it's more than just saying like it's not a freebie, right? A lot of times it comes with different implications depending on whether it's inside of an S corp, whether you're going to convert it to personal use, whether you've already got personal use on there, right? So for example, a lot of realtors or any industry, car inside of an S corp, they're saying it's 100% business use. Obviously auditor comes in and they don't have a mileage log, or even if they do, there's obviously some personal element if that's their only car.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question that the IRS auditor asks, obviously, is like, where's the car parked at night, right? So by definition, they know if you're like driving it home with you. Um, and so personal use in an S corp would be income to that person, right? So it's just, it comes with different implications that obviously are never, I don't know, just like never discussed on a 60-second video. Um, but the reality is you can always, all these things like you can do if you have the substance to support it. And what I always see as a few of the patterns is one is people always try to divorce the economics from the tax impact, and that's where people tend to get in trouble. It's like we can change our tax impact if we just change the economics. But then people will be like, well, I don't want to change anything and I don't want to do any of those things you suggested, but like I just want my tax to like magically disappear.
You're like, it's not gonna happen.
Like, well, like pretty much there's a lot of safeguards in place. And I think there's this notion of like, we have this notion of like loopholes, right? And so in our mind, we think, oh, the law is just like crazy and complex and there's all these accidental holes, but that's not really the case. For a tax law, there are certain ones that were created by statute, but other than that, if they're not like directly created by statute as an accident or purposefully, like basically tax court plugs all of that stuff. They can legally. So when you think about like we have statute, I mean the most common one I always describe is like clothing. I think it's the best example. So statute says, IRC 162A, ordinary necessary business expenses. Everyone knows, everyone's heard of that, right? So then a tax guru is going to read that and be like, I think my business suit is ordinary necessary, obviously. And they're going to be like, I'm the most sophisticated non-attorney in the world. I'm going to go online and talk about how I just read the statute and it says ordinary necessary. And in my mind, I made up the fact that I'm now an attorney and have determined what ordinary necessary means. And so that's where we get all this funny business. They'll be like, well, it's ordinary and necessary for me to get Botox, and it's ordinary and necessary for me to get Ozempic. And like, I need lots of cosmetic procedures because I need to look good. As a realtor, I need to like be presentable. I'm going to get a diamond necklace, right? So we start getting into that stuff. Well, the reason that's wrong is because anybody that knows how to do research knows that the law is not only statute, right? So it goes to the Treasury regulations and then it goes to especially court cases. Mm-hmm. So in the event of like clothing and like items that you wear and also things that you're doing to change your physical appearance, we know that the majority of the law is in the court cases. So one quick look at any court case known to man in the last like decades and decades and decades, and we know that all of that stuff's not deductible. And so even though today social media is new, like it's not different. Like it's still the same. Like people have modeled for years. People have like done all sorts of professions that have relied on their looks and their clothing for years and years and years. And we have those cases. So just because now someone happens to be on like OnlyFans doesn't change the result of the tax law. Like it's the same
Good point.
thing. And so people I've seen even like well-known, like really notable social media. One of them is like literally an actual CPA, but not a practicing CPA in my opinion. But they'll say, oh, this is the first time we've seen this. It is not. Like, this is not new to tax court. Someone getting a procedure to look better is not new. It is old hat, and we've got our law on that. And so that's where it gets just like, that's typically where the issues happen.
It's funny, when I first got into real estate, I had a photo shoot coming up and I got a haircut and I handed off my receipt and my bookkeeper was like, I don't think you can do that. Talk to your accountant. And so I called her and I was like, hey, can I write off haircuts? And she's like, no. Like it was just like, don't even try it. Like, and then same spiel, like no clothes, no this, no that. And I was like, well, what if I wear the suit in the photo shoot? And she's like, does it have safety stripes and colors on it? And you're only wearing it when you're doing said job? And I was like, no. And she's like, there you go. But
she got it.
But I think the one thing, if people haven't figured out, you really know your stuff. You and I didn't discuss what we're talking about, and you rattled off the specific tax code just now, which like you don't know that unless you know that. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to be in this day in and day out.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, especially 162A, if that's the one you're talking about, because there's actually this one influencer or tax guru or whatever that loves to repeat it. And so I'm constantly like fighting it. And like, no, here's the court case. Like, this is what court cases actually say. And he'll actually go so far as to, he talks about his tax deductions. He's like, my brand is blue, so I can wear blue suits and deduct all my blue suits. And it's like it literally, he made that up in his mind. And that is the only place that he found that law.
You're like, bro, you just told the IRS this because
Yeah.
they can go on social media and good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just crazy to me, but it's like at this, forever, and especially in this day and age, if you say something confidently enough, it is assumed to be true.
Yeah.
And so there's either two conclusions we have from it. It's like one is the guy is some magical genius, which I think is like kind of the what he's putting on, right? It's like I'm actually just so smart and sophisticated. I know all of the extra things you need to do to like get this special deduction that I take advantage of. But the reality is that he just made it up. And it's just what it is. And like the
Yeah.
reason you go to your actual professional and that person always like poo-poos on the idea is because it is fake, it is false, and it is wrong. And we have very established law, and there's just no question.
Yeah, and I mean, I think not for nothing. I'm people don't want to pay taxes, right? Point blank. And
Right.
so it's like if you want to do some funny business, and then you have somebody who's pontificating funny business,
Yeah.
then it's going to make
It's just a
sense.
psychological thing, though, because to me, it's like I'm not here to judge and be like, oh, don't deduct that. But like I'm not gonna if I'm not doing your tax return, I'm not doing your tax return. Like you do whatever you
Yeah,
want,
do it.
right?
I don't care. Do what you want.
It's not a judgment, but it's like you don't need to pretend. First off, you don't need to pay someone to feel better about it. Like that is especially pointless. Like go hire the person to just make up tax law who's not going to be there with you if you have any problems. Like you might as well just do it on your own, make up your own stuff. I mean, literally a random individual who knows nothing about tax law is just as capable of looking up the sentence ordinary and necessary business expenses and coming
Yeah.
up with their own ideas on that as these random tax gurus who just did the same thing. Like the only difference is they've painted themselves as an expert, but they haven't done any due diligence above and beyond reading like one sentence in the statute.
And that's the scary part too, because the reality is, it's the IRS is a pit bull. I mean, it's they're gonna find that you tried to pull that off in one area. They're gonna go through everything,
Hmm.
and they're gonna start looking everywhere. And so it's like, for the most part, I mean, if you're trying and you're keeping receipts and you're doing your best, it's like at least you'll just get dinged for being negligent and making a mistake versus being just outright fraudulent.
Yeah.
And you can be fraudulent through bad advice. And
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, you're at the end of the day, I think people think like, oh, well, if they come after me, they like feel better because they're like, I'll just tell them that this other person told me to do it. But it's just, I don't know how that works in other areas of the law, but in this one, the IRS has heard it. They don't care.
they
It's
don't care.
like they're over it. They only have so many resources. If they're auditing your stuff, like you're the one with the bag, and that's it. And like
Yeah.
maybe in some situations, they may care to also penalize your preparer, but it's not going to be an instead. Like in theory, obviously that person could go back and sue their preparer. Like it's not that you have no remedies, but it's always going to be a bigger pain for you. So at the end of the day, you have to just keep your own, like you have to put yourself first and
Sure.
figure out what you want to do and what's best for you rather than just like basically blindly relying on someone that says something really confidently.
I mean, I think that's business right there. At the end of the day, you are responsible for you and you're responsible for the business. And the business, it's its own entity that you are then responsible for. And so, yeah, you should be double checking this stuff. You should be asking questions. And if things don't make sense, get a second opinion. It's, I think people just get lazy and I think people move too fast in
I think
all
it's,
industries.
yeah. Yeah. And with business, I mean, it's like the difference between, I think we'll look at like blame or fault, but it's like, who really cares? With business, it's like, can you do something to prevent it? It doesn't mean it's your fault. Yeah,
Yeah.
the advisor probably shouldn't have given you that really crappy advice, but since it's you and your best interest, like, is there something you could do to prevent it? And that's where just even a little bit of planning, a little bit of education goes a long way. And that's why I mean, I just post everything. Like, there's really nothing I'm holding back at this point. I've got plans to kind of do more long form with actually just giving people like free advice, basically, like actually just like this is what I actually say
Yeah.
behind closed doors. That that type of stuff helps because I think a lot of that practical stuff, even even preparers don't have, right? Even you like think of your classic preparer, a lot of them haven't done IRS audits. If they have, they haven't taken any of those audits to appeals or to IRS counsel. So part of it is like, what's the practical answer of like, I have an issue, how do I deal with it? Right. And then when you don't go to the right resources, you get the wrong answer and then you end up in more trouble. So
Yeah.
just having some of that information where you could actually look it up in an easier format has been like my goal.
Which again, I think is super cool. I don't even know how I stumbled upon your stuff on Instagram. And again, like I'm old enough to have seen a lot of things, and I can kind of sniff out when somebody's just like
Yeah.
blowing smoke, and
Yeah.
when they legitimately kind of, you can tell when people know what they're talking about on a different, it's just a much deeper level. And I rabbit holed a bunch of your stuff, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is so good! This, oh, okay." And then that's when I pinged you,
I love
because
it.
I think there is so much. I mean, it's just the nature of social media, and it's
Mhm.
across the board in all these industries. There's a lot of just misinformation, and I mean, some of it's just for clicks, and that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate part. But it does guide people in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I've been so I mean, yeah, I think in general, I mean, humans, not everyone is amazing at being able to tell when someone's real, but I think a lot of times when we have multiple options in front of us, most people can tell. Now the problem is
Sure.
I think for so long people have only had a few options in front of them, which is like bad advice number one, bad advice number two or three. So then you start questioning yourself, being like, maybe it's right. Like
Yeah.
maybe it's correct. So that's where I feel like introducing like me putting everything on social media has been kind of that. At least that's what I'm trying to do, where it's not that everyone has to agree with me, but it gives that like opposing opinion. And I think a lot of people then it'll make them first off think through some stuff, question it a little bit more. And I do think people can tell then once they've seen multiple options like that, okay, now I see some of these other things and now I'm seeing it through a different lens. I can tell that like this isn't quite what this guy is like trying to make it out to be.
Do you know, this is really good. I love, like, this is one of my little favorite sneaky tricks. There's two questions you can ask to sniff out the pro.
Yeah.
Is you ask your first question of like, what's the capital of Connecticut? And you may get like three different answers. And then the person who knows the correct answer, if you then ask, what do most people, like, everybody says this, or all these people answered this, and then the second question is, what do most people think the first group says? And
Okay.
so the first person who doesn't know won't have a second thing that most people will think it is.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas
Yeah.
the person who knows is like, oh yeah, everybody says you can write off your 6,000 pound car, and then the
Yeah.
person who actually knows is like, well, it's true, but only in these situations, and here are the specific time or whatever
Yeah.
like the nuanced part of it is. And so hopefully I articulated that in a not
No, that
so
makes sense.
confusing
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But and you can tell. I mean, you can tell when you listen to somebody of, like, most people will tell you go down this road, but that's going to get you in trouble, and here's why. Go down
Yeah.
this road. And
Yeah.
that's a professional statement.
Yeah. A lot of it comes back to the reasoning behind things. And that's where I think a lot of the tax gurus fall short, but they'll say something as if they're like special and they know like something special, but they're not really able to articulate like where it really came from, why it's this way, or like any of that stuff. And that's why when I'm able to talk about their stuff, I'll be like, okay, well, this is why they thought this. And this is when it's true. But by the way, it's almost never true because 99% of the time this is the case.
That's case in point right there. And then the person who doesn't know, the person who's totally green and trying,
Yeah.
they just won't even know that second part of it. They'll just be like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done some like I'll do some like tweets on my Instagram actually. I know you follow. So one of them was like I was trying to compare like your social media guru, the classic thing I keep hearing on all these videos from this one person specifically, and he'll constantly be like, code section 162A, like I can deduct this, code section 162A, 162A. So I did this little tweet where it was like, tax guru says, yeah, I can deduct my white socks because they're like part of my
Oh
brand and they're
God.
ordinary and necessary under code section 162A. And they think they sound smart because they've quoted something. And then I was like responding, I was like, DOJ criminal tax division, like, so, so
Oh my
I was just like playing it out. I was like, So you ignored the Treasury regulations, all of the court cases, like all of the published IRS guidance, like literally everything else known to man.
Jeez.
And like, um, and then the response I put for the tax guru was like, but 162A, like they're just like they don't know what to say because they don't even realize that it's in court cases, or maybe they just have never read them. They don't really understand the extent because I mean, it was from law school that I learned.
Yeah.
It's like even if you quote a court case, which I've seen people do, you also can't misquote it. Like you have to actually, it's the holding that's binding,
Yeah.
right? So I've seen situations where they overturned a district court. And I designed it. An attorney did this actually on social media, and I think he knew what he was doing. But he quoted a section from the district court opinion that got overturned by appeals. So it's not a binding thing because it literally got overturned. And
Wow.
so even when you quote court cases, like you have to, it has to be like the thing that's actually binding or persuasive, which is usually the like ultimate holding of the case.
Interesting. So let's actually we should have done this in the beginning, but maybe help people understand what's the difference between your law degree and your being a CPA, and kind of what are the two lanes and how are they actually different in application?
Yeah, I mean, they go really well hand in hand, but I just got them in order, right? So I got my enrolled agent in high school, then I got my CPA after college, and then my law license. I would say the biggest difference is the tax research element. Like that's probably it. You know, I took hard classes in law school for tax, so I learned a lot more there, but it really came to I learned how to learn tax law
Mm,
in law school versus the CPA. I don't know. The amount you learn in bachelor's, a lot of it's very technical accounting. It's not really applicable to actual returns, like actual practice. And then the CPA, you know, exams are exams. You just study for the exam. So like the
sure.
CPA, even the bar exam, neither of those were like monumental to my knowledge base. So the real difference comes down to the ability to research tax law. And that's where I went. Because even when I was a CPA, I remember an attorney mentioning to me when I was doing some corporate case where he was on the other side with the client. And he was like, go look at the regs. I was like, yeah, what? What do I need to do? And then obviously from law school, I was like, okay, like how can people ignore the treasury regulations? You know, but it's like a different world. So it's from reading like mass number of court cases that really got me to a different level.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Um, Way beyond my pay grade. Like my brain does not work in this capacity at all. And I really enjoyed right at the beginning when we were actually talking about business and then your role, and you were like, I love this. And it's like that's the person you want to hire, because if
Yeah.
you look at it and you're like, ew, I don't want to do that. And then the other
Yeah.
person's like, I love that. I'd be like, hire them, because they're
Yeah.
gonna find joy, this immense joy in all the things that you're just not good at.
Well, it translates too because the interest in learning, what it means is like we end up learning more. If I,
Sure.
you know, you end up doing whatever you enjoy doing, you do it for longer. And so because I love learning, I learn more.
Yeah.
Therefore, I become better. And that's literally the definition of experience, you know?
Yeah. It's funny when I get my hooks into something, when something's just really insanely curious, like I'm just so curious about it, and I can't stop. Like I literally can't stop studying whatever that thing is, and it could be just like weird random stuff. I'll just deep dive forever. Jasmine, this has been amazing. We're unfortunately we're running out of time, but it was actually such an engaging conversation. I feel like I've learned more how to protect myself in the tax world, which I
Good.
think is important.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to reach out to you and just they have questions, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as actually reaching out, I would say probably emailing me at jasmine@taxleverage.com.
Mhm.
Not to say I respond to absolutely everything, but that would be like the actual how to reach out with me. But otherwise, following on YouTube. So my handle's at tax leverage. And then on Instagram, it's at tax leverage JD. So either of those ways, I'm literally, I mean, I'm not holding anything back. I'm so sick and tired of people giving crappy information. And honestly, even people that know a decent amount, like I also see them putting out just enough for you to like be like, well, that person knows what they're talking about, but I still don't have my answer.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to actually just put useful information out to like help more people. A lot of times people are in situations that it like literally doesn't make sense to hire a professional. Like they'll get IRS penalties where had they just done something tiny correct, they would have avoided thousands of dollars, but now it would actually take thousands of dollars to fix the problem of the same size. And so it's like actually just helping people not get in that situation is my goal.
And that's what I appreciate about you is you're actually putting this content out there for people. And the other side is if it is too complex, like this stuff's way too complex for me, I have a better idea of how to ask questions. And so
Yeah,
I really appreciate the work that
of
you've been doing
course.
on that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna do some more long form. So literally going through start to finish for clients, like how I look at things. So a lot of times you can just like apply it to your situation if you can't afford to hire someone.
Love it. Well, I look forward to watching that whole side of the world evolve for you.
Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap.